Welcome to the return of worst rappers in the game. So you guys might have seen my post where I said that I was thinking about changing the name of this series. Well, I decided against that now. Look, if people get mad at these video titles without actually watching the content or they refuse to give it a chance or whatever, that's just how it is. I'm not gonna give up one of my best pieces of clickbait like that, but that doesn't mean that there's been no changes at all to worst rappers in the game, because there has been a few. First of all, take a look at that thumbnail style compared to the old one. I'm pretty proud of that change. Let's pour one out for the days that I made the thumbnails for this series on PowerPoint. But the main thing is that the format of these videos is going to be slightly different now as well. Do you know why these videos took so long for me to make? It's because trying to break every single rapper that I'm covering down into their voice, flow, lyrics, their beats, and then my overall enjoyment of them, after a little while it just got really repetitive to do and hard to figure out sometimes. So now what I'm going to do is simplify it and just cover the albums that I listen to from the rapper that I'm talking about in chronological order. And then I'm going to give the rapper in question a rating of 10 at the end based on how much I enjoyed what I had to hear. And of course you can find all the newly updated rankings of all the rappers I've covered in this series so far down at the bottom of the description below. It's a long intro for this one, but I thought I should explain all these changes so you know how this series is going to go from now on. And in this first episode following this revamping, I'm going to be talking about Roddy Ricch, also known as Roddy Ricch, one of the more interesting rappers to come into the mainstream rap scene for me lately. To get an opinion on his music, I listened to Feed the Streets 2, Please Excuse Me for Being Antisocial, and Live Life Fast. So, what was my experience with his music, and is he one of the worst rappers in the game? Been a little while since I asked that, and it feels good to say it again. Well, this is CDTVProductions, and let's talk about it. Now I wanna run it up, nigga. Purple Fender in the cup, nigga. VVS is straight from my behind. You claim you bought a nigga, why you lying? Feed the Streets, the first project from a 19-year-old Roddy Ricch back when he was Roddy Broke. And you know what? For a project that is his first ever mixtape, he hadn't dropped any other projects before this, it has quite a few songs that were better than I expected them to be. Roddy is a talented guy when it comes to hooks and melodies that just worm their way into your head and get stuck in there for days, and he has that on a few of the songs here. The hooks of Fuck It Up, Plotting, Money, and Quality are gonna be stuck in my head the entire time that I'm making this video. I'm at the cut on these niggas, I do the work in the back. And there's a couple of tracks on here that are pretty different to Roddy's current day sound that are honestly pretty fucking great. The song Money that I just mentioned, I'd never heard that before making this video, but now that might be one of my top Roddy songs and definitely like my top one from this project. The pianos, the bass hits, the Dilemma vocal sample, also known as 169 Ah, the drums, everything on the beat slaps, and Roddy's hook is very simple but extremely memorable. My phone, bitch. I don't want to talk to you, cause I just want the money, nigga. Quality, which I also just mentioned, is a similar song with a darker tone, and it fucking slaps too. The second verse on that one sounds like I'm taking inspiration from Young Thug's angrier sounding verses. Bitch, I gotta get a mansion. Young nigga gotta move it in. Then a nigga gotta take it out, pack a shit, but then I gotta move again. Like I said, those two are maybe my favorites on here. For his first go at putting together a project, it has some great songs. It also has some of the issues that you'd expect from a first project as well though. It is fairly nice, but it does come off as a compilation of a bunch of songs with varying levels of quality and a little less consistency than Roddy Ricch would go on to show on later projects. Like, he definitely hadn't fully settled on what his sound should be at this point. He has the emotional melodic sound on a lot of these songs that you see on later Roddy tracks, but it's not quite there yet. And he doesn't switch up his flows and deliveries as much as he will on later projects. Great examples of this are Hood Rich, Rich Vibes, and Blue Streak. Songs that are nice enough and show promise for Roddy, but a bit more generic and less exciting than his later music. Run a check up just to fuck it up. I was down bad lonely. Remember I was asking granny for 50
I take my family out, it's on me.
A lot of rappers don't have first projects this catchy though, even if there is quite a few songs that I could do without. And it is cool to hear what it sounds like when Roddy experiments with slightly different sounds than he has in his music in the current day. Overall, a solid start for Mr. Ricch. First things first, I think the cover for this mixtape is hilarious. Like, it really took the idea of Roddy feeding the streets super literally by turning him into a play. But with Feed the Streets 2, Roddy's development continues, becomes more consistent, and overall it works better as a project than the first Feed the Streets. Here is where he starts moving more into his unique melodic sound, but he's not quite perfected it yet. However, I will say there is some clear highlights on here that are done so well. Die Young, Every Season, and Down Below are some beautiful melodic tracks from Roddy, and Down Below probably has my favourite hook on this entire project.
Down below, remember them cold nights, I was sleeping on the floor.
Outside of those songs, which those are all pretty much the biggest tracks on this mixtape, at least as far as I'm aware, I think NASCAR is pretty great too. The beat is super fast paced, and interestingly it's one of the only ones on here that I can remember that uses really obvious auto-tune on Roddy Ricch's voice. But it works for this one track. Even a couple of the tracks with weaker beats, like the intro, showcase Roddy's talents as a rapper, because I find the beat on that intro to be super boring, but Roddy manages to elevate it a little bit and make it more interesting with the way that he rides that beat.
I've been rocking ball main, and your niggas shop at Paxin. Bitch, I've been hopping out the bag, is different.
To be honest, as a whole, the beats feel a lot less specific to Roddy Ricch on this project. They generally seem more like standard rising trap artist instrumentals on here, but it's Roddy's improvements as a rapper from the last Feed the Streets mixtape that makes this more captivating to listen to than if you gave any other artist these exact same beats. Other favorites here that I haven't mentioned yet are Cream, crazy second verse on that one, Area Codes, and Down For Real. This mixtape isn't outstanding to me, and we haven't quite reached peak Roddy Ricch yet, but it is consistently good, and a pretty smooth listen with its refined track list.
Pulling out the coupe at the lot, told him fuck 12, fuck SWAT, busting all the bells out the box, I just hit a lick with the box.
It's the best Roddy Ricch album yet, the end. But to elaborate on that more, it's pretty fucking amazing. If you think I haven't sounded like that much of a Roddy fan yet, this is where the real dick riding begins. The vocals, the flow, the production, please excuse me for being antisocial, is the current high point for Roddy Ricch in every aspect. It was one of my best albums of 2019 for a reason. And I like the first two Feed the Streets projects, but it's just wild how big of a step up this one is for me. Just the intro alone, holy shit. I can't emphasize how much I love that track. The beat switch hits so impactfully, and Roddy just flows perfectly over each part of the beat, rapping with some heart and some openness.
My big bro behind bars, fight 200 years. I got the call, I lost my dog, I don't know how to feel. If you rockin' with the ops, we gotta wet the block. Got my Glock in the Dior.
The production across this whole tape has a consistent sound, and it's super smooth, but what's really showcased here though is Roddy's flow and delivery. The project never really ever has the chance to get boring because of how frequently Roddy keeps things moving and switching up. The hook for Perfect Time, for example, has like 3 delivery changes within 8 lines, and all of them work.
Rich, but I'm still ducking one time. I seen the light and I climbed in. Shawty done fell in love.
I used to hate the high-pitched voice cracking delivery that he did at the start of that hook, but even when I didn't like it, it didn't really matter because he moves on from using his voice in that way so fast. Now that I like that part, the song is just even better to me. This is one of the things that set Roddy apart to me at this point in his career. So many artists in the mainstream trap style subgenre can make their songs or even their albums way more boring than they should be with their refusal to switch up their flows or change the way that they're delivering their voice. But with Roddy, it's just constant movement that almost always works and always feels natural. Because switching it up a lot like this can be a risk. Like, he could end up going from a super catchy, really enjoyable flow into one that just kills your engagement with the track, but that basically never happens with Roddy on this project. And of course, as I've mentioned his hook ability a couple of times throughout this video, this is his project with a bunch of his catchiest ones out there. The hook of the box being so catchy is one of the things that made it his biggest hit. Those little vocal inflections on Backseat are great. High Fashion puts a lot of focus on Roddy's great vocals with the chill instrumental. And the way he rides the beat on the hooks of Pita and Tiptoe are so smooth. Not to mention War Baby. Putting a choir on that hook at the end of the song was just such a great move, and it really gave that a final track feel.
Survived in the trenches on the war, baby. Had to slide on the sliders, that ain't normal, baby.
There's legit only 2 songs on this project that don't really stick with me: Roll Dice and Prayers to the Trap God. In the case of Roll Dice, it's one of those really rare ones on this project where I think it actually has a pretty weak hook and one that doesn't sound all that good. And Prayers to the Trap God has some deep lines on it, but it's just not very attention grabbing when you compare it to everything else on here. They're the only ones that don't really have any parts that stick with me. Every single other track has at the very least one part that I love. Listening to this project for this video was still exciting, and it's the Roddy Ricch album out of all of these that I've heard the most. It's the album that made me think that Roddy could really go on to be one of the biggest hitmakers of the 2020s.
Flew my bitch out from Thailand, she do the most. My niggas hot like some cayenne.
And after the high that was Please Excuse Me for Being Antisocial, let's talk about Live Life Fast. This is near enough unanimously considered to be Roddy Ricch's weakest project. People did shit on this album a lot when it came out, but I would argue that it's clear that Roddy Ricch was trying on here. The end result just doesn't compare to his other pieces of work. To me, it feels more like a slight misfire rather than complacency or lack of effort. Because he sets it up to have a big album feel with a dramatic spoken word intro, the interludes and all the instrumental outros and intros to certain songs. It has a movie kind of feeling to it, but the songs themselves just don't really hold up to the standard that Roddy set for himself with Please Excuse Me for Being Antisocial. Most of the album feels like a great setup with an unsatisfying payoff. I think Roddy blowing up so quickly and life moving so fast, as the album name says, has left Roddy unsure of what direction to go in, and it definitely affected the quality of the album. The best way I can put it is he just doesn't sound as certain of himself on here. It's really easy to forget what the songs sound like outside of Thailand, Hibachi, Murder One, and All Good, whereas his previous albums had melodies that got stuck in my head for days after listening. The hooks don't stick as much, which was Roddy's biggest strength on his first 3 projects. The flows are less fluid, and his delivery just doesn't showcase the same range or expressiveness on Live Life Fast. It might be his only project where I feel like a lot of the beats are better than Roddy's performances on them. Roller Coastin' and Crash the Party sound like half-finished leftovers from his last album with less energy.
Roller coasting. She told me every time I talk, I give her chills. Bought my dad a 911, 300,000 on his body. Gotta watch out for these snitches.
Move to Miami had this cool sort of drum and bass, I guess, style intro that could have been setting up a really unique style of Roddy track, but that gets cut off and it just changes into a standard rap song before it has the chance to be interesting.
Moved to Miami and caught me a boat. Hope my fiends don't stop doing coke.
No Way has that really weird line that just fizzles out into nothing.
Went 4 times on his 5th time. Ever seen a snake turn to a rat? Like, nah.
Slow It Down is questionably short considering No Way had a whole skit at the end dedicated to setting it up. Everything You Need could have been good, but Roddy singing on it sounds a bit too shaky.
Wanna make you fall in love. First thing we need is trust. Second thing I need is love.
Don't I and More Than a Trend are downright bad. The album does feel like a stack of missed potential. I do have to stress that I don't think Live Life Fast is bad. It just leans more towards being forgettable and underwhelming. And please excuse me for being antisocial, it is a high bar that he set for himself. It would just be cool to see him get close to it again. I do believe he can do it because overall, Roddy is still very good at the age of 23 years old, and he has a bundle of potential. One lackluster album isn't the end of the world for Roddy Ricch, especially when it mainly seems like the result of blowing up too fast.
Real talk, let's get straight to it. I got diamonds in the face.
So as you guys probably know, in this series, my ratings are mainly weighted towards the artist's own album music, but I thought it would be worth mentioning stuff like features, singles, EPs and all that to give a more complete picture. The best place to start would probably be with his most recent EP at the time of recording this video, The Big Three. It's okay. It's not bad. But I don't know, from Live Life Fast to this EP, Roddy Ricch just doesn't sound as confident in himself. Like he's now unsure of his ability to craft a great hook or a captivating verse. It's so weird because the songs on there have potential, but they just kind of get dragged down and ruined a little bit by small things in the tracks. That gang 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 part of Real Talk.
Hey, gang, 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 gang. Gang, 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 gang.
It brought the whole thing to a standstill. Tootsie's overall is probably the hardest track, even if it is a little generic, but tell me why he broke that rhyme scheme during the hook when he could have just said D. It would have rhymed.
Blew 100 last month at Tootsie's. Catch me in ATL with my YSLs pushing P. Stop talking that talk, bitch, suck this dick.
And No Mop is just alright. As a whole, it's a bit closer to Antisocial levels than Live Life Fast, so it's somewhat a step in the right direction, and hopefully he saved his best tracks for his next project. In terms of features, it doesn't really seem like Roddy does them all that often, but from what I've heard, he does fairly nice on most of them. He's a standout on Letter to Nipsey by Meek Mill, Pure Souls by Kanye West, the Too Easy remix, and Gifted by Cordae. There's no features that I've heard from him that are all that bad. Unfortunately, the weakest one I've probably heard is his most recent one, at least as far as I'm aware, his most recent one, on Cooped Up by Post Malone, where he just sounds completely unsure of what to do with his flow, and it sounds really awkward. But overall, he's usually a solid addition as a featured artist. And you know what? While I'm mentioning extra stuff, you should really check out Roddy's live orchestra performance with Audiomack. The live symphony version of his song Ballin' is actually incredible. Roddy seems like a solid enough live performer, and that shit hits your soul.
I've been waking up to get the money, whoa, whoa. Got a bad bitch ass tatted, whoa, whoa. Javinci to my toes, 2 twins, I'm fucking them both. I put in new AP, the water like a boat.
Or his Every Season acoustic remix on the Einer Banks channel. There you can see how in control of his voice he can be.
I gotta put the new bells inside of the freezer. Back at the trap, I was ducking them people, ducking the birds, sending out the Migos. All of my diamonds gon' bust out the meter.
Those videos show Roddy's raw talent in my opinion, even if he hasn't quite sounded like himself lately.
Clip got 33, Scotty Pippen, bitch, nigga ain't heard of me, I got it rich. Dripping my sweats through Givenchy.
So in terms of how much I enjoyed all the projects that I listened to for this video, from least favourite to favourite, I'd have to say Live Life Fast in last place, then Feed the Streets, then Feed the Streets 2, and then far away at the top, please excuse me for being antisocial. Overall, I really do like Roddy Ricch, and I think he's showcased something fresh and exciting within this subgenre at certain points in his career with inventive flows and ever-changing vocal inflections, but that is why I get a bit frustrated with his not so great output in the past year or so. But I'm holding out hope that he'll manage to bring it back close to antisocial levels soon. He's still a very young artist with a fairly small discography. And now it's time for the fun part, boiling down everything that I've talked about so far into a rating out of 10. Keep in mind that my new rating system is exclusively whole numbers and halves, and if there's 2 rappers that have the exact same score, let's say, I don't know, 3 rappers that have a 5 out of 10, I'm gonna put the one that I prefer above the one that I don't like as much. So with that in mind, I'm gonna be giving Roddy Ricch a 7.5 out of 10 for now. placing him currently at the number 5 spot on my list, just below Lil Uzi Vert, who, in my opinion, to me personally, is more consistently great, and above Ski Mask the Slump God. Also keep in mind that this is an ever-evolving list that I'm going to be updating and, switching the rankings around when the artists on it drop new music. And if Roddy drops another great project again, I definitely feel comfortable bumping him up to an 8 out of 10. I really want to. I just need his discography to grow a bit more with some more great music. So yeah, make sure to subscribe and keep an eye on my community tab, because that's where I'm going to be aiming to post about it if I do change the order of the rankings in this series. And I hope that you guys enjoy this new format for worst rappers in the game. I appreciate you all for watching. Click here on the screen to catch up with the rest of the series, and you know who else I appreciate. My beautiful, sexy, attractive, lovely supporters on Patreon, with a tiny extra dose of love to my biggest supporters on there, and those are Agir, Big Daddy Foe, Griffin Upchurch, I Am Region, and Ryan Shadow 507.